We've been doing this sermon series on gifts of grace. We've been talking about the gifts that God pours into our life through grace itself. We've talked about spiritual gifts, and hopefully you've all taken your surveys and you've turned them in. If not, I think there's at least one or two extra copies back there. Share those with us because we want to make sure that we are engaging you in your giftedness, that we want to make sure that we're allowing God to use you, the gifts that God has given you, to bless the community and actually to glorify God through those. We've talked about spiritual gifts. We've talked about personal passions, those things that we're really excited about, those things that we have energy for, and that God has poured His Spirit into us that we might have special energy to do certain things. We've talked a little bit about talents, and we've talked about how we like to use those things or how we're intended to use those things. Now we're going to talk a little bit about that challenging level of things. What's next? Well, the dangerous part is this. Too often, we get excited, energized, and we just want to get involved. We want to do things for the glory of God. In fact, we want to share our gifts, and we get passionate. But if you're like me, my daughter's really good at doing the same thing as I am, and she'll actually claim it. You like to just keep adding things to the list, right? So you want to get involved at church, and all of a sudden you find yourself doing children's ministry, youth ministry, committees, missions, service, worship, community ministries, music, families, hospital, prayers, you name it. The list just keeps going on, right? Set up, tear down, all that good stuff. I can do all that. I can do more than that. I can just keep the plates spinning, right? Have you ever found yourself in the midst of overload? Life overload? Okay, maybe it's not just the church stuff anymore. Maybe we need to start thinking, well, what about this other stuff that goes on? Maybe we have some family stuff or some work responsibilities. We have parents we have to care for at times. We have kids that we have to care for all the time. We have social obligations. We have financial responsibilities. We have hobbies. We have sports, commitments, stress, shopping, the holidays, and all of a sudden extra meals to prepare and how many family members that are coming over. Now we're getting overloaded, right? Or maybe you're just one of those that's really good at juggling and you can keep how many balls in the air at the same time. Not only that, but you're juggling and then you decide that you want to start doing the circus act, so you start spinning plates. So you got 10 balls going and 20 plates spinning, and all of a sudden somebody offers you that, can you breathe fire while you're at it, right? And you think, oh, I can do that. I can make all of this happen. I can just keep pouring it on, and I can handle all of this. But if you step back and look, you might have to say that, I'm a little overloaded. Maybe, in fact, I find myself in a momentary glimpse of what some might call chaos. You know what I'm talking about? Have some of you found yourselves ever staring chaos in the face and thinking, hey, I look pretty good, don't I? I can handle all this chaos in my life. You know, growing up, I've shared with some of you, we had a big garden. We had even an orchard. We grew everything from apples, pears, plums, cherries, apricots, you name it. My dad had trees, and I remember every year he took time caring for those trees so that they would produce the most, you know. I remember he had to go out and spray the trees to keep the bugs off and the disease and so forth. He sprayed the trees. He also put snakes in the trees. Do you know that? They weren't real snakes, but they were rubber snakes. Why do you think he put rubber snakes in the trees? Birds. They'd keep the birds away, so the birds wouldn't eat the fruit. But every year, I also remember this other thing he would do. He would prune the trees. He would prune the trees back. And I remember as a kid, I looked at that and said, what are you doing? Why are you going to kill the tree? In fact, there was times I would look at that tree and I'd look at like this pile of branches on the ground, and I'd look up there and said, Dad, what'd you do? You took more than half the tree off. You killed the thing. He said, oh no, this will make it more fruitful. What are you talking about? You take that many branches off, it can't produce more fruit by taking that many branches off. I came to understand you can actually make sense of this when you begin to realize that every tree or every vine, in fact, I'm convinced every person has a certain amount of energy, don't we? We have a certain source of energy, a well which we can pull from. And, of course, in the winter, that sap goes down to the ground, stays in the roots, and then in the spring comes up and gives life to this tree and fruitfulness to the trees. And I think we all have a certain energy reserve that we're able to pull from or draw from to do the things that God gifts us to do. And I began to realize that, no, what happens if you prune a tree, you prune off the unhealthy, or you prune off those shoots that are just starting, and they're going to pour all of their energy into growing during the season rather than to bearing fruit. If you prune off those things that are focused on or doing other things and allow the branches that really are able to produce fruit to produce the most fruit. Think about it this way. If you have 100 branches that are pulling from this particular reserve of energy, they all get, like a 1/100th of that, right? But if you prune out like 80 branches and leave 20 left, they all get 5 times the amount of energy, 5 times the amount of resources to actually bear the fruit that they're able to bear. And you begin to think, well, that's kind of smart, isn't it? Help the tree focus on those branches that are going to bear the most fruit. Help those trees actually focus on the things that they do well. I began to realize pruning might have its value. I began to realize even in my own life that pruning might have value for me as I begin to realize or think about the fact that maybe there are times in my life that I'm just busy. Maybe there's times in my life that instead of being fruitful, I'm busy. Have you ever found yourself in your life being busy rather than fruitful? Because that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the fact that God wants us to be fruitful, not just busy. Let me ask this question. In your life, are you the vine or are you the branch? Are you the vine, which, by the way, when you begin to think of yourself as the vine, which Jesus says that we're not, we're the branches. When we begin to think of ourselves as the vine, we begin to think, well, I can do this and I can do that, and I've got to do this and bear this fruit, and I've got to have these many branches going on in my life. But God doesn't want us to think that we are the center or we are the vine. No, we have to understand we're the branch. And God has gifted each one of us specifically to bear a certain kind of fruit or to use those gifts in a certain way that we glorify God and bless each other with those gifts. But we can't do that if we're trying to be the vine. This word in the Bible that says to be pruned or to prune, and in fact, in the first verse it says that every branch in me that does not bear fruit, God prunes it off. But every branch that does bear fruit, the vine dresser prunes so that it will bear more fruit. Well, this word prunes is kathario in Greek. Kathario, which interestingly enough, it doesn't necessarily mean to prune as we think of in branches. It actually means to make clean, to purify. It actually means to eliminate those things that are fruitless. Think about that for a minute. What would your life look like if you were to eliminate the things that were fruitless? If you were to eliminate the things that just took your energy or stole your energy, and instead you got rid of those things and you focused on the things that were fruitful. You poured your time and your energy into those specific things. I think to be effective in life, in ministry, in family, at work, we have to be pruned. We're not meant to do it all or to juggle all those balls and spin all those plates. We're meant to focus on 1 or 2 or 3 things that God has gifted us for so that we can do them to the glory of God. We have to be pruned to be able to do that. Think about it in a very, very plain way. Aren't there certain things in your life that you know you're gifted at or you're good at? And in fact, sometimes you cheat those things. If you're really honest with yourself, you cheat on those things. I know for myself, I find myself cheating on occasion because it's like, I know that I do this well. And I can find myself saying, oh, I can do this really well even if I only spend, 20 minutes on it. I can do good at this and just put in marginal effort. Why do I do that? Because I've got all these other things over here that I just have to do. I have to keep the plates spinning. And you know what? I have to put a lot of energy into these plates over here to keep them spinning. I got to put a lot of energy over here just to make them survive. And in fact, it's kind of funny because there might be other people who are gifted and could spend 20 minutes in this area that takes me 3 hours and I'm not really good at it, but they spend 20 minutes and do it better than me. And then I think, well, if I were to take the time that I spend on these things, just keeping the plate spinning, and prune off the things that are not fruitful, and pour that same amount of time and energy into the things that I'm really fruitful at, the things that I'm gifted for, how much better, how much more fruitful would that be? Are there things in your life that don't give you energy? Are there things in your life that just suck the energy out of you? Are there things in your life that need pruned, trimmed, tossed away so that you can actually pour your life, your energy, your giftedness into things that God has said, this is what I have designed you for? And here is where you will bear the most fruit. And if you did that, what might God do through you? To be honest, I think there are things that hold us back. To be honest, I think as I've gone through my renewal a year ago and continue studying in my doctoral program, one of the things that I've learned is the most important in life. It's not just adding things or doing more things or trying to achieve above others. In fact, I found what I think is most important is the pruning. It's removing of the things that aren't fruitful so that you can focus on the things that are fruitful. But in the process, I've had to confront some things in myself. I've had to confront my own fears. Because, let's look at it this way. I remember looking at that tree that my dad was trimming up. And I remember looking at the stuff on the ground and thinking, oh my goodness, you just killed the tree. And then I think to myself, well, maybe that's why I'm afraid of trimming those things back. I'm killing myself. or I'm afraid of what other people are going to think. They're going to look at me and say, well, you used to do that. Why aren't you doing that anymore? It's your responsibility. Well, I'm not gifted for it. But that's something you need to do because that's part of, see, you're afraid. I'm afraid of sometimes pruning back the things that I know God has not gifted me for specifically. I think sometimes we're also afraid of pouring our energy into something or one specific thing or those two specific things that we know we're gifted at because we're convinced that we individually have to be able to do everything, don't we? God doesn't say that. God says we're one body. We're all gifted differently to be able to support each other, to care for each other, to glorify God and to build up the kingdom of God. That's the point of spiritual gifts. Not that we're able to do everything on our own, but that we're able to care for and support each other with the best of who we are. So the real question we need to begin to ask ourselves is, how do we identify the areas in our own life that we need to prune? How do we identify the areas that we need to trim up and say, okay, that's not good. That's not bearing fruit in my life. And I think we need to look at our personal life. I think we also need to look at our ministry life. We need to take time and step back and ask ourselves the question, okay, what are the things that I'm just doing to keep the plate spinning? What are the things that pull time and energy from me? What are the things that don't bear fruit or show much of a blossom? By the way, what happens when you pinch a blossom off of a flower or off of a fruit, what happens immediately? Begins to bear more fruit or blossom 10 times more. Why? Because we're allowing the energy to disperse into the area that it's meant to disperse. We need to begin thinking about those things in our life that we're not very passionate about. Those things that take our energy rather than give us energy. Those things that stress us out or burden us down rather than the things that fill us with joy. We need to focus instead on getting rid of those areas in our life that are not fruitful. That's what this passage says. So that then we can focus on the areas in our life that bear fruit. Think about it this way. Are there areas in your life that consume more time, energy, finances, and emotions than they should? Are there things in your life that someone else could step in and do and find joy in doing? The next thing we have to ask ourselves is, when we start pruning back our life, when we start taking away those things that are just burdensome, taking away those things that God hasn't designed us for, then we need to begin to ask ourselves, where then are we going to pour our energy? Where then are we going to pour our energy in a way that glorifies God and blesses other people? This is a good place for us to begin to take that spiritual gifts assessment that you should have all taken by now, and to begin to make a list of things that you do, things that you enjoy doing, things that you feel called to do, things that you're passionate about. Make a list of those things and be able to cross-reference them with your own giftedness and say, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's why I love doing this. That's why I feel so built up and affirmed in this particular role. I need to do more of that. Because God blesses me in the process, and God blesses others through it. If we're doing things and it's not doing that, then we're missing the opportunity to be who God has truly called us to be. Because God has gifted us specifically to be able to bless others. It has blessed us specifically that we might bless others. Really, the goal is this. In the example of pruning, the goal is this: to do half as much, twice as effectively. To prune out those things that just take energy and to put that energy into half as many things, but to produce twice as much fruit. You see, what God has called us to do is to be the kingdom of God together. To be the orchard, to be the vineyard, to bless each other with our fruitfulness as we share of our gifts, as we share of our talents, as we share of our passions together. So brothers and sisters, that's my challenge for you this week. I want you to pray about, to look at, to think about the areas in your life that God may be inviting you to prune. And then think about the areas in your life that God might be inviting you to be more fruitful in. And to be honest, we had this conversation last night in Talkback. I think it has to be more than just a once-a-lifetime kind of thing. I think this kind of process, thinking through your own life, should be at least once a year. But I think it could be even more. I think I've begun this process of doing an Ignatius exam every week to be able to look at my life and what are my responsibilities? What are the things coming up this week? What are the things that I can remove? What are the things I need to pour more energy into? And I think the more we do that every week, the more free we feel. The more at peace we feel, the more joy we feel, because we know we're investing ourselves exactly where and how God has called us. So I challenge you this week. Where can you prune? And where can you bear more fruit?